First in Minnesota, because the state and the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul are suing the Trump administration over a surge of federal forces there. The lawsuit argues that federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, have acted unconstitutionally and unlawfully by violating the state's sovereignty and civil rights laws. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said yesterday that the unprecedented surge has made the community less safe.
The deployment of thousands of armed, masked DHS agents to Minnesota has done our state serious harm. This is, in essence, a federal invasion of the Twin Cities and Minnesota, and it must stop. These poorly trained, aggressive, and armed agents of the federal state have terrorized Minnesota with widespread unlawful conduct. They're making unconstitutional arrests and using excessive force. DHS agents have barged into restaurants asking to access secure areas. And when asked to present a warrant, which is required by law, they respond, "We don't need one."
So you heard from him there, but we are going to hear much more directly from Attorney General Ellison coming up in just a little while on Morning Joe. Meanwhile, at least 4 leaders of a Justice Department unit that investigates police killings have resigned in protest after the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, decided not to investigate the fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer. And then on the heels of that deadly shooting in Minneapolis, we're learning that federal investigators are reportedly examining any possible ties the victim may have had with activist groups. This is according to the New York Times. They write officials are looking into whether Renee Good was involved with groups that have been protesting President Trump's immigration agenda. As the Times notes, the decision by the FBI and DOJ to scrutinize Good's activities and her potential connections to local activists is in line with the White House's strategy of deflecting blame for the shooting away from federal law enforcement and toward opponents they've described as domestic terrorists, often without providing any evidence. It's there I want to start with White House reporter for Politico, Maya Ward. Maya, I think the way that DOJ has, completely shifted any blame away from the ICE officer in question here is stunning, obviously in part prompting some of these resignations from within the Civil Rights Unit. I think that is stunning on its face. And then, of course, the way that they are going after people who are just exercising their First Amendment right to protest. This is actually fundamental in this country. I think it all lends to more concern around these ICE operations that were already concerning to a lot of people across the country. So what do you make of the way now, almost a week after this initial incident, the White House is tripling down on its stance, but what else is happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, it fits into what we've been seeing since last week. And like you said, I think it's making those concerns that I was hearing from administration officials, Trump allies, only worse. I mean, people were telling me at the end of last week that they're worried about, ICE's credibility and the trust from the American public and how people are actually going to see this investigation when you have Trump administration officials immediately coming out and saying this was domestic terrorism, that, the ICE officer acted in self-defense. We saw a little bit of a split in how, Tom Homan came out initially and talked about this. Initially, he said, let's wait on this investigation to unfold.
Which, by the way, and we said this on this program in the immediate aftermath of what happened, why is it bad to say, let's just figure out what happened here? I mean, that shouldn't have been notable on its face, but continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's how these things have been handled historically. And so now, if anything, this is only adding to tensions. We see another shooting in Portland last week, and someone said to me, well, that was a targeted operation. There's a difference in that. But that being said, the American people aren't going to necessarily see a difference as these events continue to unfold because they saw the way that the administration handled the Good case. Now they're seeing these officials resign. So it's just hard for people, especially these, officials who have worked for the agency for a really long time, believe in the mission. There's just a lot of concern about that relationship between, the federal government and the American people and how they see this agency. I mean, it's only going to get worse is their concern.
Yeah, it's only going to get worse. But as you're writing about in Politico, the idea that there's internal doubt that there's resignations happening at DOJ in part because of a lack of investigation into this officer. I mean, when does that internal doubt rise to the top of the internal structure that's actually running these operations? When does that rise to a Stephen Miller or a Susie Wiles or the president himself, right? Because in Trump world, you're typically using the press to talk on background to try to signal that there's a problem because there's no real permission structure and certainly no positive feedback for complaining yourself. But does that actually bring about any change here?
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, someone said to me last week, like, how do we, and this is an administration official, how do we recover from this after the Good shooting? And there's not a lot of faith that something's going to actually change here, because I mean, the end goal, right, is, and it's coming directly from the White House, they want more arrests. They want more deportations. And so we see this administration only doubling down. You know, there's 2,000 agents on the ground. They're trying to send 1,000 more. And another big piece of this that folks are really worried about is when you have ICE agents in these situations, you know, doing crowd control, you know, not even just these targeted operations, but increasingly running in with these protesters. They're worried that these are dangerous situations. You're already putting these ICE agents in tough situations. Obviously, tensions are incredibly high right now, and that there's just a lot of fear that like something like this could happen again.
Yeah, and I do think that there were a lot of very heavy parts of what happened in Minneapolis, but one of the other pieces of this, and I'm pretty sure Governor Walz said it, is that this was always the fear when you saw these surges of ICE agents in various communities across the country and members of that community trying to follow ICE, protect their fellow community members, that those tensions were going to flare into something tragic like this. And ultimately, that moment did happen. I think it's more for us to continue watching, but it's also just an open question of if the administration wants to soothe those tensions or only further inflame them.